Hi guys, it's Michelle again with Fabric Funhouse, and today we will be tackling the Portside Duffle Bag from the Portside travel set from Grainline Studio. I'm only making the duffel bag out of this. It seemed like a really big challenge for me. It's the biggest bag I've ever made, so I'm going to make that today, and you're going to follow along with me. And we're not going to use any quilter's cotton or interfacing, so I'll walk you through some of the modifications that I'm probably going to end up doing and any of the changes that I do. Then at the end, we're going to review the pattern. I'll tell you what kind of problems I ran into along the way, but let's go over our materials. This pattern calls for, and I'm going to just read it to you, medium to heavy weight fabric such as canvas, twill, and most fabric labeled as home decor weight. Lighter fabric can be used but may need to be more heavily interfaced or interlined. We're not using any of that. We will be using cork and wax canvas, of course. So for the exterior of the bag, I'm going to be using a conjunction of this Wistful Mauve waxed canvas and our print called Succulents out of cork fabric. So that'll be our exterior. And then for our interior, I'll be using this charcoal gray wax canvas, so it'll have a waterproof interior. This will make the bag a little heavier, probably a little harder to sew, which is great. I'm looking forward to it. The other thing I'm going to use is going to be surface cork fabric. I'm going to use this as accent for the straps, and I'm going to make it out of this instead of getting webbing or some pre-made straps. Now that is a lot of cork. I don't expect you to be able to do this necessarily. It does make for a very nice padded strap, so I'll walk you through how I do that. And I also will be using our metal zippers for the first time in a pattern. So let me walk you through my modifications, any problems I run into, and then at the end I'll give you an overall review on how it's sewed up using my domestic machine. Today I'll be sewing, as always, on my Singer 9960 Quantum Stylist, which is 9 to 10 years old now, and I will be using a 9014 Microtex needle, a 40 weight Aurifil thread in probably a couple of different colors, and I will be using hardware from Emmeline bags in gunmetal to match our metal zipper from Fabric Funhouse. So I'll add links to everything below, but yeah, let's get started. While I'm not using webbing, I am using cork, and I'll go over how to construct this later on. But here is where I would really like to use my sew tights when I don't have an edge to clip onto. I did forget to hit record when I'm sewing, but here's the finished product. When assembling the side piece, the bottom and top, the instructions said to grade the pattern pieces. That's kind of an apparel term, but what I did was basically just made sure that when I would flip it down, it would look like one congruent piece. And in order to do that, that's where I ended up placing it. And again, another place that's great for sew tights to keep that cork laying down while I top stitch it. I apparently forgot to hit record sewing the other exterior panels, but they were very easy. I just gave myself a 1/2 inch seam allowance, folded it over, and then top stitched. The pockets, though, were a little different. I did cut 4 pieces of the pocket size, 2 of lining, 2 of exterior fabric, and then I put them right sides together, sewed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the top, folded them out, and then top stitched that top edge that will be a finished edge. Here I'm just basting the pocket on. The sew tights also come in handy right here. It's just a U-shape seam. Alright, so for straps, since they want 1.5 inch wide webbing by however long, I cut however long by 6 inches. The reason being is I'm going to take 1.5 inches from both sides and fold it into the center, and then I'm going to fold those 2 sides on top of itself to make a completely enclosed piece of strap. That's what I'm doing right here. You can see me clipping it and getting it all nice and straight to where it's not twisted or anything, and then I am just top stitching around this edge, making sure that, you know, I give myself about a 1/4 inch allowance, because if you if you sew too close to the edge, it could very well crack your cork depending on what kind of cork you have. So just make sure you give yourself some breathing room there. I did this because I want to make my life easier for this next step, which is folding it up and making the handle. This part I need to lengthen my stitch quite a bit and take my time. I don't want to break a needle or anything, so I just take my time right here. And I've marked with chalk where I need to start and stop. Okay, now that my straps are done, I'm going to put them onto the sides, covering the edges of the pockets that are unfinished. Sew tight's coming in super handy again because I can't put clips right here in the center of the bag, and this will help them to keep from moving all wonky. And so I'm just making sure that they're completely parallel, that they're straight, and then I'm marking with chalk where I want my stitching to end in a box with an X in it. Then that will just reinforce that top edge for when I'm carrying this bag around. If anyone has a great tip on how to sew this reinforced box at the edge of my strap, I would love to hear your thoughts because I am the worst at it. This is where it gets super complicated for me. I'm trying to do what they asked me to do, which is the sides separately, and it's not going well. You'll see here in a minute, but basically I want to top stitch. I want it to look nice, and doing it this way gives me kind of a weird uneven edge, it seems like, even though I'm using a ruler, and it's also not going to give me a clean top stitch. I'm going to have to go over what I just did. So I end up seam ripping all of that. And I've decided at this point that I also need some zipper tabs for my zipper because I'm not going to want to sew over the metal part, and I also need something towards the end because there's a gap. I'll explain later on why I would do this differently next time. Okay, so not the greatest news, but what I did is I went ahead and took off the zipper, unstitched everything that I had just done because it wasn't coming together the way that I wanted it to, and I feel like there's an easier way. So I'm going to go to the method I'm comfortable with, which is a sandwich method to put on the zipper. I'm also going to make a little bit longer tags so that they sew up really nice and don't come unstitched. So I'm going to first tack on these tabs with one line of stitching on the zipper. Then what I'm going to do is have this face up with this on there, and then I'm going to put this right here, and I'm going to stitch a line here, and when I fold it over, it should be lined up correctly, and then I'll have to top stitch it. This is where I make a little mistake in that I put these stops on before I knew what size zipper I needed. Next time I won't do that. I will make the tabs a little larger to where they go in a ½ inch instead of kind of sit only like a1/4 inch to an 1/8 of an inch inside that outside edge. I think that will help a lot when finishing this bag, and you'll see why here in a little bit. Alright, just attaching the zipper. Had a wonky line, so I had to go back, and then I flip it out. And now I'm going to top stitch that edge so it looks nice and neat. You can kind of see where the line's going to be because of my old stitching I already pulled out. Now I'm doing the same thing to the other side, sandwiching the zipper in between the two edges. Well, I didn't hit record, so what I did was sewed this way, inside out, flipped it over, made sure that I pressed these down as far away from the zipper as it would let me, and then top stitched down this line. It looks a bit of a mess, but if I took the heat gun to it, it would look just fine. So it looks a lot better than it did before. I'm happy with this. So we'll continue on kind of doing the method I think will work best. Okay, now that I've got the first section on, I kind of wanted to go over how it looks like and why I did what I did. So the pattern's going to tell you to sew the outside and the lining separately and then drop it in and then slip stitch it around the entire zipper. And I'm not good at hand sewing and I don't like to do it, so I'm going to do it kind of a more bag maker way, I guess, as far as I understand it. So what I've done is I'm doing the lining first because I can push it easy. It's easier to like mush up and push out of my way when I'm sewing. So I'll do the harder part after this. But I lined up the center of this piece over my zipper right here. And then just kind of took it out from there. So I started at the edge here and worked it around. Now, as you can see at the top, I have a little extra on either side, but I can just trim that off if it, needs to be here in just a second. So I will sew around this. I'm actually going to start a little off of the zipper and sew because I'm going to finish it when I sew this piece on, I believe. So this is the inside of my bag. So this is what the lining will look like. I hope you can see that, but this is what the lining will look like. It'll have finished seams. If I did it the other way, it still would have finished seams, but it would take a lot longer for me to hand stitch than it would to burr the bag. And how I'm going to do this is once I sew up these circles, I'm going to put my bottom in here, right? And then I'm going to leave most of one of these sides open in order to burr the bag. That's what I'm doing. It is not what the pattern calls for. And if you don't understand that, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to go over this kind of more in depth in another video. But yeah, it's a traditional, as far as I understand, like pretty much every bag I've ever made has been sandwiched with the zipper and burred out of the lining. So I'm going to attempt this and see if I can get it to turn out right. So I'm just using a little bit of knowledge that I have to try and make it easier on myself. So we'll see how that turns out. It usually doesn't work. I noticed that I didn't capture all of the raw edge with my seam, so I'm hand sewing that. This was by far the hardest thing I had to sew, was this cork bottom, and the reason is that cork is self-healing. It wants to bounce back to its normal form, so I was fighting against it the entire time. I do think that I could have made this a little easier on myself, and I'll explain that at the end of the video, how I think I could have gone about this differently. And now it's time to burr our bag. I did rip so many stitches doing this that I almost got to the intersection of all my seams, but not quite, and it turned out just fine. Okay, now for the fun part. I am going to make my own straps, and I shortened it to 60 inches mainly because that was the width of my wax canvas. I decided that I was going to do a two-tone, which means that instead of having it by 6 inches, I really only need it by 3 inches, folding in 3/4 of an inch into the middle, because I'm not going to fold it in on itself after that. I'm going to put the wax canvas over the seam and you'll never see it. And now we do the same for the wax canvas. Though I did cut it a little bit smaller so that the cork would peek through on the edges, you'll see right here. Now I'm basically going to sew it like I would any other strap. I'm going to top stitch it 1/4 of an inch away from that cork edge so it captures all of this underneath it and make a very straight, flush strap. Because I'm not going to enclose this edge, I'm a little worried about it fraying, so what I'm doing is applying fabric fusion, which we carry in the shop, to the ends, and then I'm going to let it dry for a little bit. That will prevent fraying for however long I'm using the bag, even though that's not the part I'm going to be wearing. That part could wear quite easily. I'm using a strap slider made specifically for this reason instead of a couple of D-rings like the pattern calls for. I just think it looks a little nicer. Now to finish out the bag, I need to close this lining. So what I'm doing is I will use a matching thread instead of this mauve thread I've been using the entire time. I'm going to use a gray matching thread, and I'm going to sew pretty close to the edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch, to enclose this lining. I also see a couple of wonky sides, so I'm going to hand stitch those closed, and that way the bag top will sit a little bit better. I think this could be fixed before I get to this point. Well guys, that's it. We conquered this pattern. We didn't have to call in reinforcements, and we did it all on our domestic sewing machine. I did some modifications that I don't know were actually necessary, and I'm not sure that I didn't just kind of fall back into a habit of sandwiching the bag and birthing the bag. So, you know, maybe follow closer to the pattern if you want to the first time. But it just seemed like that would be the easiest thing for me. And I didn't like the way that it looked at first doing it the other way. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. But here she is, this beautiful, ginormous, week-long duffel bag that I think I'm going to absolutely love. Even with a little bit of wonkiness, she's beautiful. It's the best top stitching I've ever done. I love the color scheme. I think it's eye-catching and it's unique. I'm glad I lined this pocket. I'm really loving how it looks, and the metal zipper makes it look hardcore, that it's going to be able to withstand everything I'm going to put it through, which is quite a bit. I'm glad I shortened the strap. I think me being 5'3½", it was better this way because it's not going to drag under my rear. It's not going to hit me in the back of the legs. And I can even wear it crossbody if I want to, and it will still be perfect size. So I'm glad I did that. Okay, let's talk about some of the modifications we did. So on my bag, I didn't use any interfacing because I'm already using cork fabric and wax canvas, which has some structure to it. I did shorten the long strap to 60 inches instead of what the pattern called for. And I'm really happy that I did that because it is perfect for me on my short frame. It's not going to hit me in the back of the legs, and I don't have to tighten it all the way up, so you do get to see that buckle, which I love. I did substitute the hardware. So instead of using all D rings, I used 2 triangle rings and 1 strap slider. The other thing I did was insert some zipper tabs, and we'll talk about that again in a second, which I'm really glad I did at the time. I think that it's kind of necessary, to be real honest. I don't think I would like it without the tabs. I cut an extra pocket piece in order to make a finished pocket that had a lining to it. I would do that again in a heartbeat. Even though the way the pattern calls for would be a finished top edge, you'd still run the risk of pulling that out depending on how much you use that exterior pocket. I don't think it would be sturdy enough for my use because I stick everything in my outside pockets. So I'm happy that I did that. And of course, the other modification that we did is I just went completely off book and sandwiched the zipper instead of sewing the lining separate and then attaching it at the end and then having to ladder stitch or slip stitch the edges all the way around the zipper opening. I don't think I would have liked that, especially with these thicker materials. I probably would have hurt myself numerous times. I'm happy I did it this way. I think it would be easier the next time. So let's just jump right into some of the problems that I had and what I would change next time. So the thing that struck me first when reading through the pattern is that this pattern sounds like more of an apparel pattern, or I guess it would be better to say a pattern written by someone who normally writes apparel patterns versus someone who normally writes bag patterns. And I hope that's not an offense to anybody, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, but, you know, it said certain things like grading the seams and just a couple of other, you know, pieces of literature that just didn't sound like a bag pattern, any bag pattern I'd ever made before. So not saying it's a bad thing, it's just coming from a different perspective. So I think if you have no bag experience whatsoever, you might want to attempt other patterns first before diving into something like this. But the pictures were very helpful. That helped me sort out quite a few things, as always. The major issue I had with the pattern itself was this step right here. I don't know, that picture right there, it just didn't give me a lot to go on. And maybe it's just me. It could always be just me. Yeah, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. The main issue I had with this pattern and how it was written were steps 18 through 20. I'll be honest. It was sewing the side pieces, sewing the bottom on, and then putting the whole thing together. Those steps, the way they were written, weren't super clear for me, who is a novice bag maker. I would consider myself an advanced beginner, like it says is the requirement, but I just couldn't quite visualize what they were asking for, not even after watching a couple of YouTube videos from people that have sewn this bag before me. So, you know, just putting that out there, you may want to start with a different bag pattern before jumping on this one so that you have a basis of knowledge to pull from. And, you know, maybe if I had continued on the way that they wanted me to, maybe it would have become more clear. I'm not real sure. So the other problem I had, and it was just totally when it came to something I did probably, was when I went to sew on the side panels of the exterior, because of course the lining has no right or wrong side when you use wax canvas, and you can cut some off if you wanted to or needed to. But the side panels didn't quite line up like they were supposed to. And it might be because I should have used a longer tab. I was having to sew at a certain spot at the top because I had to avoid the metal zipper. I'm not really sure what's wrong there and how I could fix it in the future. So if you have some advice, please stick them in the comments down below because I'd love to hear it. basically what happened is when I did line up the side panels, the bottoms, you know, they need to match. And so I would line those up. Well, then I had excess side panel at the top. So it bunches a little bit on the side, and I actually ended up having to hand stitch that a little bit to keep them together and clean looking. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm not real sure how to fix that. So the next time that I sew this particular pattern, I think what I'll do is, for one, I'll do longer zip tabs. I actually may even wait to cut my zipper and to pull the teeth off of my zipper until I have my stuff cut out, because I did the zipper first because it called for a length of zipper. I just did it. I won't do that again. So what I'll do is I'll cut the sides out, mark where I want my zipper tab to end, and then I'll take over with my zip and make sure that the teeth are right inside those zipper tabs and where they will end. So next time I'll do that. The other thing that wasn't super clear from the instructions that I did read on a blog and that I will totally do next time is when you are sewing the sides and the lining together, you would want to stop about a 1/2 inch from the end so that you can flay those open on the bottom and stitch around that. So I will definitely do that last. I did unstitch them, but it still wasn't quite good enough. And with the cork, it definitely made it harder to sew a good corner around there. I think the flaps, the seam allowance kept getting in the way and folding over. And I'm not real sure if, you know, that was a me problem or something else. But I think that ending about a 1/2 inch before the edges, the bottom edges, will help next time. So I'll do that next time. And then the only other thing that I might consider doing is putting in some sort of interior pocket. I didn't feel like I needed a pocket in there. I did think about putting one in, but I did see a blog where someone had put an elasticized pocket in there so that they could put their dirty socks or their dirty clothes separately from their clean clothes. I kind of like that idea, so next time I might do that. Let's take one last look at her before we go, shall we? She's so pretty. All right, guys. Well, that's the end of this video for today. Please hit like if you're enjoying this series and hit subscribe if you want to be notified of the next one. And if you have any comments or questions, please drop them down below. I do read through those. Well, until next time, just remember, all you need is a little love and a big idea. Thanks, guys.